Sorry. Right, we now come to the next statement. Home Secretary.
Thank you. With your permission, Mr Speaker, I will make a statement on public order. The Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, Sir Mark Rowley, has requested a prohibition on processions relating to Al-Quds Day under Section 13 of the Public Order Act. Madam Deputy Speaker, I have consented to that request, placing a ban on these processions for both protesters and counter-protesters that will now last for a month. This is the first ban since 2012, and so I wish to explain why I have done so to the House today. It is important that we start with the context. Initiated by Iran's then leader, Ayatollah Khomeini, in 1979, Al-Quds Day is an event held on the last Friday of Ramadan. The day is marked worldwide by rallies and demonstrations in support of Palestine, including here in Britain. Plans for a procession this Sunday in London have been led by the Islamic Human Rights Commission, an organisation that has been closely associated with the Iranian regime. Of course, this year's event interacts with the ongoing conflict in the Middle East. It comes at a time when the Iranian regime is attacking British forces and bases, as well as those of our allies. It also comes just days after the arrest of 4 individuals as part of an investigation led by counter-terror police. They were arrested under the National Security Act for allegedly spying on Jewish communities on behalf of the Iranian regime. This context creates clear challenges for the police. Heightened attention and therefore larger expected attendance, heightened tensions between protesters and counter-protesters, and therefore greater potential for conflict. The expertise regarding if and how this can be safely managed rightly sits with the police, and the legal test is clear. Any request to prohibit a procession must only be lodged with the aim of preventing serious public disorder that could not otherwise be prevented by imposing other conditions on a public procession under Section 12 of the Public Order Act. Section 12 conditions typically include specifying the route, location and times of a protest. Under normal circumstances, they are sufficient to ensure protests remain peaceful and the public are kept safe. However, the Commissioner has clearly stated that the Metropolitan Police's view is that serious public disorder cannot be avoided unless a prohibition under Section 13 is introduced. This assessment is grounded in the tensions created by international conflict, the scale of the expected march, and the presence of protesters and multiple counter-protesting groups, all seeking to march at once. My first duty is to keep the public safe. Having carefully and thoroughly considered the risk assessment presented to me by the Metropolitan Police, I am satisfied that an order under Section 13 is necessary. For 1 month, there will therefore be a prohibition on processions in London related to Al-Quds Day by protesters and counter-protesters, which will come into effect today and will end on the 11th of April. Should the Commissioner consider a further extension is required, he will be able to make a further submission at that time. I must be clear about what this prohibition does not do. The Police and Home Secretary only have the power to prohibit a public procession. Section 13 cannot be used to ban a static protest, referred to in the legislation as a public assembly. Should a static demonstration proceed this weekend, the police will not be able to stop it. Instead, they will be able to impose conditions, such as dictating the precise location and timing. People will therefore be able to exercise their right to peaceful protest, though the full force of the law will be enforced if hate crimes or other crimes are committed. Today's announcement is confined to specific circumstances, but I know this will excite scrutiny around the wider issue of policing protests. The House will be aware that I have appointed Lord MacDonald of Riverglaven to carry out an independent review of public order and hate crime legislation. His review is ongoing, and I will update this House on its findings at the soonest possible moment. I would, however, like to make a wider point about the right to protest in this country. What I have announced today is narrowly focused. on specific circumstances in a unique moment, but it does not alter an enduring fact. In this country, we rightly pride ourselves on our freedoms, including the right to peaceful protest. It is a precious right and one that I revere, and it sets us apart from autocracies of all kinds across the world. This prohibition is therefore limited and specific. It bans marches, but not static demonstrations in relation to Al-Quds Day. Equally, I must add, there is no prohibition on protesting against the plight of Palestinians, and there never will be. Hundreds of protests have already taken place across the country this year in solidarity with Palestinians, and the Met alone have policed 32. Peaceful and lawful protest, whether for Palestine or for Israel or for any other cause, must be cherished and protected, and this government will always defend that sacred freedom. At the same time, as Home Secretary, I have a solemn duty, and it is my first duty, to keep the British people safe. I have been presented with the assessment of the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police that he cannot guarantee the security of our capital and prevent serious public disorder without a prohibition on processions relating to Al-Quds Day. Having reviewed his assessment, it is clear to me that my duty to the public and their safety dictates that I must accept his request. It is right that we prohibit these processions while continuing to uphold our ancient commitments to the freedoms that we are rightly proud of. And that is the balance, Madam Deputy Speaker, that I have sought to strike today, and I commend this statement to the House.
I call the Shadow Home Secretary, Chris Philp.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, I fully support banning this march. The police assessment of the risk is right, and in fact I wrote to the Commissioner a week ago urging exactly this ban. But the problems with the Al-Quds March go beyond simply the risk of serious disorder. In 2010, 10 people were arrested for assault of an emergency worker, inciting racial hatred and public order offences. Chants at Al-Quds marches in the past have called for intifada and revolution. Calling for intifada and revolution are calls for violence, and calls for violence have no place on our streets. A leading speaker at these marches has been Nazim Ali, a man who has demanded that Israel, quotes, be wiped off the map. Speaking at a previous march, Ali even blamed what he called Zionists for the Grenfell fire. He also said, and I quote, we are fed up of Zionists, their rabbis and their synagogues. This reference to rabbis and synagogues shows that when this despicable man says Zionist, he means Jews. This is clear anti-Semitism. So speech inciting violence and speech inciting anti-Semitism, which we have heard at these marches in the past, has serious consequences. Anti-Semitism is now rampant. Jews are 10 times more likely to be victims of hate crimes than Muslims. We saw an Islamist-motivated murder at a synagogue in Manchester just a few months ago. In the past 25 years, 94% of all terror murders in the UK have been committed by Islamist terrorists, who also make up 75% of counter-terrorism caseloads. So does the Home Secretary share my concern that the prevent caseload is only 10% Islamist in nature? And if she does share my concern, what does she propose to do about that? The organiser of the Al-Quds March is the so-called Islamic Human Rights Commission, which, as the Home Secretary quite rightly acknowledged, is in essence a front organisation for the Iranian regime. Now, former Iranian Deputy Minister of Culture, Ali Aksar Ramazanpour, has said that there is a network of Islamic charities in the UK which are, in his words, not autonomous, but are in fact funded and controlled by the regime in Tehran. Does the Home Secretary share my concern about that, and what does she propose to do about it? Of course, in opposition, the Labour Party also, I think rightly, pledged to proscribe the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. Will she update the House on the implementation of that pledge? I'm also deeply concerned about many events that have been recently held, particularly at universities, lamenting the demise of Ayatollah Khamenei, a man who in the last few weeks was directly responsible for the murder of 30,000 of his own people, a man who supported and sponsored terrorism around the world, including backing Hamas and the atrocities on October the 7th, and who backed various regional wars. Will the Home Secretary join me in condemning those who mourned his demise and celebrated his evil acts? More broadly, Madam Deputy Speaker, and finally, the Al-Quds marches are a troubling symptom of a growing division in our society, where some people define themselves primarily by their religion or their ethnic heritage, and we've seen that spilling over into the conduct of elections. This is deeply troubling and deeply divisive. It undermines the very foundations of our nation, which depend on a shared identity and shared values. I'd be interested in the Home Secretary's views on that, and I hope the House returns to that topic. Let me finish with a broader point. Extremism has no place in the UK. Support for terrorism or violence has no place in the UK. Religious and racial hatred, including anti-Semitism, have no place here. So when someone who is not a British citizen expresses extremist, violent, pro-terror or racist views, in my view they should have their visa revoked and be expelled, as set out in Section 3 of the Immigration Act 1971. The Home Office's own guidance makes clear, and I quote, that support for extremism or other unacceptable behaviour meets that statutory test. So will the Home Secretary use those powers to expel extremists who are not British citizens?
Home Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the Shadow Home Secretary for his comments and his questions. Let me just say to him, firstly, he began his remarks by talking about some of the unacceptable acts of violence and incitement to violence that have taken place at various marches, not just relating to Al-Quds Day, but it is not unusual for multiple arrests to be made at all the different types of protest marches that take place. I hope he will join me in supporting the police as they ensure that the full force of the law is applied at all times, in all circumstances. And of course, I have recognised that there are some complexities in the legal framework and an inconsistency of application, and that is why I've asked Lord Ken MacDonald to do his review so that we do have much more consistency of practice across the UK and clarity for the police about what they can and cannot do when it comes to some of the things that are said when protests take place. And I hope that we can continue to work together across this House on those matters. He asks a specific question in relation to Prevent. Let me tell him that, of course, I keep under review the way in which the Prevent programme is functioning. There have been a number of recommendations made, multiple recommendations over many years, with many reports into the functioning of Prevent, and it is important that Prevent referrals are made in line with the statutory requirements and with the guidance, and that they are picking up those that we want to take away from a mindset and an ideology that could ultimately result in harm. So, I don't think it's appropriate for us to set percentage requirements of what should happen in terms of referrals, but it is absolutely important that the right referrals are being made, and we always work with partners who deliver the Prevent programme and with local authorities and others in making sure that that is done properly. Let me say to him on the Islamic Human Rights Commission that the trust that is responsible for that charity is currently subject to a statutory inquiry by the Charity Commission, so I think it's important that that work is allowed to continue, and of course once they have reached a determination, I'm sure that that will be something that will be discussed in the House in the future. On the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, he will know, we have said this before, we've had this discussion many times at this dispatch box, and in fact the answers aren't all that different from when these positions were reversed between our parties. We do not comment on matters relating to proscription, but this government has accepted the recommendations made by Jonathan Hall, Casey, and we will be taking forward that work at the earliest available opportunity. Look, in relation to those who are mourning publicly the death of Khomeini, the deceased leader, supreme leader of Iran, this is where free speech really butts up against what conduct most of us would consider appropriate. Let me say to him, I do not, of course, mourn the passing of Ayatollah Khomeini. It is for others to decide what they do and do not support. What I'm absolutely clear on is whatever methods people use to express their political views, they must do so in line with the law of this land, and that law should be always enforced without fear or favour. And I will always support the police in making sure that that is the case. And then separately, he also asks about how we work as a society. I think his questions are about what the responsibilities are of citizens in this country. I don't think it's for a government to dictate to its citizens what political views they're allowed to hold or how they should express themselves or their identity, whether that is religious or ethnic or something else in nature. It is the job of government to make sure that we have a set of rules and a set of values that are equally applied, our respect for democracy, our respect for the rule of law, and all of the norms by which our society operates. That does mean that we do accept free speech and people's ability to have views that might be offensive, that many of us might disagree with, but they are still allowed to express those views. And I wouldn't want to see anything that happens in relation to these very troubling events to then clamp down on those freedoms that we hold so precious. It is always a judgment and it's always a balance that has to be struck, and it's important that the government always tries to strike that balance in the right way. And then on his final point, this government has already taken action, and I will always use my full powers under the law to make sure that those who would cause harm in our country with their extremist views are not allowed to enter our country, and I won't hesitate to use my powers under any of the Immigration Acts to exclude people from this country who have no right to be here.
Mark Sewards.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the Secretary of State's decision to ban this weekend's Al-Quds March. Al-Quds was founded by the Ayatollah 40 years ago. It has repeatedly featured support for the Iranian regime, terrorist groups, and often promotes dangerous anti-Semitism too. Given the growing threat to Jewish communities across the UK, will the Home Secretary now move to prescribe the IRGC, consider sanctions on regime-linked assets, and outline what further steps have been taken to protect the Jewish community?
Home Secretary.
Thank you. Well, my honourable friend will know that the IRGC are sanctioned in their entirety already. And as I say, we don't comment on matters relating to proscription, but we have accepted the recommendations made by Jonathan Hawke AC, and the government will take those forward at the earliest available opportunity.
Democrat spokesperson Max Wilkinson.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the Home Secretary is aware that we have concerns about her authoritarian tendencies. We have particular concerns about this government's enthusiasm for restricting the right to protest and its use of terrorism legislation, wait for it, to prescribe protest groups. Liberal Democrats place a much stronger weight on the right to peaceful protest than the Home Secretary does. That is her right. It is a fundamental freedom, and any decision to ban a march must only be made in exceptional circumstances. However, on this occasion, it is right to take a cautious approach. The Islamic Human Rights Commission has very concerning views on Iran. The organisers have expressed support for the late Ayatollah Ali Khamenei and have claimed that he stood on the right side of history. Clearly, these values are at odds with the British public, who would rightly condemn the Ayatollah's oppression of the Iranian people and sponsorship of terrorism across the world. At a time when Iran is putting the safety of British citizens in the Middle East at risk with its indiscriminate attacks, it would be inappropriate for this march to go ahead. Nevertheless, a decision to ban this march highlights a deeper failure by the government to tackle the underlying threats that fuel such tensions. Labour has dithered and delayed over the prescription of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the organisation responsible for much of the violence and terror emanating from Iran and for attacks abroad. It is utterly ridiculous that the Home Secretary has already sunk almost £1 million of taxpayers' money in fighting in court to keep Palestine action prescribed, whilst dragging heels on the IRGC's prescription, even when the independent review of terrorism legislation has urged immediate prescription. So will the Home Secretary today commit to confronting the threat of the Iranian regime by immediately prescribing the IRGC? And if not, will she give the House a date for legislation?
I have to say, the opening remarks were rather disappointing. Let me just remind him of what I have actually said and done in relation to the right to protest. One is allowing the cumulative impact on communities that are affected by protests to be one of the reasons why police place additional conditionality on both a procession as well as a public assembly under Section 12 and 14 of the Public Order Act. I'm very disappointed that the Lib Dem spokesperson thinks that's an authoritarian tendency, when actually what we're doing is responding to repeat protests, creating real tension in our communities, and we are creating the conditions in which those protests can continue to go ahead, but with additional conditions as to their location and their time, and making sure that that framework is very clear for the police. That is actually an argument for allowing those protests to happen, but not in a way that also creates real fear amongst minority communities in this country. I'm very disappointed to see that the Lib Dems have set their face against that and would characterise that as authoritarianism. They are wholly wrong. These are the necessary steps to protect our vital freedoms and also our minority communities as well. The law in this area always requires a balance, and this government is seeking to strike that balance in exactly the right way. And the only other remarks I made in relation to protests were immediately after the terrorist attack at Heaton Park Synagogue in Manchester, when I suggested that marching the very next day in support of the Palestinian cause is perhaps not something that is British, because we should show some compassion to those who are suffering. Those are the only two acts, and he set his face against both of them in the opening remarks that he made. Let me just, I've already addressed the point in relation to the IRGC. They are, of course, sanctioned in their entirety. We will take forward the recommendations made by Jonathan Hawcasey. He knows that requires legislative change. We must act at speed, but also with care, and this government will do so. I think it's important that we don't conflate different issues. They are all, lots of these issues are causing tensions across the country, but the situation in relation to Palestine Action Group is different to the matters that we are discussing today. And I would suggest that, members of other parties should not seek to conflate those to score political points. I'll leave my remarks there. Thank you, Madam Deputy.
Rachel Blake. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I represent the area affected by this intervention, and I welcome the Home Secretary's intervention on public order policing today. I listened really carefully to the statement. She made clear that this prohibition is specific and discreet and focused. And what I heard was a real balancing of the challenges that she faces every day and that public order policing in London face every single day. The centre of London is home to dozens of synagogues and mosques and prayer rooms, and it's really important that I take that responsibility seriously of making sure that everybody is safe. I've been in regular contact with my constituents over the last week on this very topic. Will the Home Secretary work with me to articulate really clearly the rules and legislation in place to address these very challenging issues that we're all facing?
I thank my honourable friend for her remarks and her question, and also for the work that she has done on this issue, which I know has affected the people that she represents. Important to note, as she rightly does, that this is a very specific and discreet request from the Met Police, who of course have huge experience in dealing with multiple protests on multiple occasions and who have good policing experience. I take seriously the fact that this is the first time in many, many years that they have sought such an order, and they have done so given the unique circumstances posed by the planned marches in a few days' time, and in particular the threat of both protests and multiple counter-protests all moving through London at the same time. That does represent a very unique policing challenge, but I do pay tribute to the Met Police for the work that they have been doing to ensure that our freedoms in this country are protected. She will know that we've already commissioned Lord MacDonald to look at the legislation in this area and to make recommendations for clarifying the legal framework, and I look forward to working with her on all of that work once his review is in.
Greg Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the Home Secretary's decision on this, but as my right honourable friend, the Shadow Home Secretary, made clear, this speaks to a much wider problem. So can the Home Secretary say what steps she's taking to ensure the United Kingdom cannot be used as a safe haven for the wealth, influence networks or political activity of senior figures connected to the Iranian regime, with specific regard to recent reports that the new so-called supreme leader of that Iranian regime is linked to a network of high-value London properties acquired through associates or shell companies, and what steps she will take to close down any loopholes or strengthen those sanctions?
Home Secretary.
Well, I thank the honourable member for his question. We are obviously looking very carefully at the allegations that have been made, and we would expect, of course, that the police and our security services respond appropriately. We will always work closely with them to ensure that we do so. Look, he raises a broader point, I think, in relation to the state threat that has been represented by Iran, which I know has been discussed in this House on many occasions before, and he will know of the public comments made by Sir Ken McCallum, the Director General of MI5 and others. Let me just assure him this government takes all all levels of state threat very seriously, work very closely with our security agencies to make sure that we're always taking the necessary steps to keep our country safe.
David Pinto-Dyczynski.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Al-Quds March, glorifying a despicable blood-soaked regime, has long been a cause of great concern for my constituents in Hendon. That's why I wrote to the Commissioner of the Met asking for the march to be banned, and that's why I want to thank the Home Secretary for her resolute action today. But the threat posed by the Iranian regime to our Jewish community has not ended. Following the arrest of 4 men allegedly spying on our Jewish community on behalf of the Iranian regime, what steps are being taken to keep our Jewish community safe?
Home Secretary.
Well, I thank my honourable friend, and he will know there's a live police investigation that is taking place, so I cannot comment or give any additional details to this House until the criminal justice process is complete. But let me assure him we work very closely with our colleagues in counter-terror policing and in our security services to monitor the threats that are posed to individuals and organisations in our country and take all appropriate measures to keep our people safe.
Simon Hall.
Mr. Speaker, the Home Secretary may know that I, along with colleagues on this side of the House, signed at least 2 letters to the Prime Minister in recent months, calling for the recognition of the state of Palestine. But I also support the decision that the Home Secretary has taken today. She has demonstrated, I think, the seriousness of purpose that she's taken on a very important decision, but one which clearly commands, I think, huge national support. One can be in favour of the decision that she has taken, and also in favour of the rights of the Palestinian people. The two are not alien of each other. She mentioned the static protest that could take place in lieu of a march. Is she able to tell the House, does she or the Metropolitan Commissioner have the power to time limit that specific event in order to ensure that ordinary people going about their business are not disrupted and that huge blockages do not take place in the capital in lieu of a moving march?
Home Secretary.
I thank the honourable member for the points that he has made. He's absolutely right. Let me just agree with him for the first part of his remarks on the rights of people in this country to support the Palestinian people, their right to self-determination and their desire for an end to conflict and recognition of their own state. There is no decision that this government has taken that prevents anyone from being able to express those political views and to take part in peaceful protest to draw attention to that cause, and that can all still absolutely continue. He's right on the static protest, so there are powers under the Public Order Act for the police to place conditions upon static protest. They can relate to both time, location, as well as other measures. Those will be operational decisions for the Met Police to make in the coming days.
Luke Taylor.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I thank the Home Secretary for this action? It's proportionate, and she seems to be taking lessons from the Liberal Democrats on that. Can I reiterate the calls from the Liberal Democrats to prescribe Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps and encourage her to come forward with timetable for that legislation to be delivered. But can I also ask what steps have been taken to ensure effective policing of the static protest that will go ahead on Sunday to protect Londoners and our police from potential clashes?
Secretary.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the House will be pleased to know I will decline the invitation to learn any lessons from the Liberal Democrats, not just on this occasion but forevermore. Look, let me reiterate the point in relation to the IRGC. We will bring forward measures as soon as we can. We obviously have to proceed with care because these are complex matters and we have to get the balance right in terms of the action that we take, but we have accepted the recommendations that have been made by Jonathan Hall-Casey, and the government is working at pace to make sure we move forward with delivery. And in terms of the conditions that might be placed upon a static protest that may or may not take place, those are operational matters for the Met Police. But, you know, I and the whole House should have every confidence in our police, not just in London but across the country, because police forces have been dealing with a huge increase in the number of protests, the variety of protests, the multiplicity of counter-protests that take place. And I think it is, we should pay tribute to the work of our hard-working police officers day in, day out, who manage to keep our country safe whilst allowing respect for our fundamental freedoms as well.
Father of the House.
I agree with I agree with everything the Home Secretary said today, especially as she's one of the best Conservative Home Secretaries we've ever had. But will she forgive me in asking her to stress this one part of her statement? I've noticed there's an increasing tendency to say that we should ban marches because we find the views of the marchers thoroughly offensive. Frankly, most of the marches in London I find fairly offensive because most of them are left-wing. But I would defend to the death the right of them to march. So can she emphasise this is a very high bar and you will only be banned if you incite violence or you might cause violence?
Well, again, sorry to disappoint the honourable gentleman, the father of the House, but I am Labour all day long. And I do enjoy swatting Conservatives, Lib Dems and Greens and everybody else at my leisure, and I will continue to do so. He is right on the law. It is a high bar for any banning order to either be requested or granted under the framework set out in the Public Order Act. It should be a high bar. He's absolutely right. People are allowed to have their own views, and we should not be seeking to shut down views that, whilst they might be offensive or provocative, are still within the law. And it is important that we always ensure that it's the law that is being followed, and any attempts to interfere with freedom of either expression or assembly should always meet a high bar. I am very satisfied that in the specific and unique circumstances set out for the public procession that had been planned, that test has been met. But of course the other protests can and should go ahead, and the full force of the law will always be applied.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. What consideration did the Home Secretary give to the compliance with sections 10 and 11 of the European Convention on Human Rights on the right to protest? And what discussions did the Metropolitan Police have with the organisers of this planned march to ensure that it could go ahead safely and would be properly stewarded and properly run? Because in my experience, the police are very accommodating and keen to have very long discussions with march organisers in order to make sure that the right to protest is maintained in our society. Because there is a slippery slope here. You ban a march that is not necessarily a very popular march, and that then leads on to draconian banning orders on all kinds of protests within our society.
Yeah.
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman. Firstly, let me say to him on the European Convention on Human Rights, he's right on Articles 9, 10 and 11. Those are the relevant articles to the matters that we are discussing today, but they are qualified rights, and they have always been qualified rather than absolute rights, which mean that the state can limit those rights in specific circumstances as long as legal tests of proportionality and so on are maintained. And I'm confident that the legal arrangements that we have in this country, that the terms set out in the Public Order Act, are obviously fully in compliance with our convention obligations, and that there is a very high bar for the powers that exist under Section 13 of the Public Order Act. I am satisfied on this occasion that that high bar has been met. And let me say to him, look, the Met Police have been policing this procession for many years. It is an annual event. They've policed it even when there has been huge opposition to it going forward. They faced a lot of pressure over many years in order to seek a ban, and they have never done so. And I'm very, very confident that as they have assessed the risk posed by this particular procession in the current context that we are in, and particularly given the range and the number of counter-protesting marches that are planned for the same day, that does present a unique challenge for policing to be able to manage 5 different marches at the same time in the same bit of London. I think that they've made a very fair point, they made a strong case, and I have agreed with it on this occasion.
Dr. Andrew Morrison.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I very much welcome the statement, and I do commend the Home Secretary's judgment on this occasion. Now, plainly, the Islamic Human Rights Commission will seek to exploit the loophole that's offered up under Section 13, and that will be around the ability to protest in a static way. Has a location yet been identified for where that static protest will be likely to be? And would she agree with me that it should be away from where it's going to discommode the general public and in a place that is not going to place undue burdens on our policing resources, which are finite?
Well, let me say to the honourable gentleman, any conditions that may or may not be placed on a static protest will be matters for the police. Those are operational matters. They have the powers available to them. I'm sure they will make use of those powers in the way that they have been doing with protests that have been taking place across the capital for some time now. And they would, of course, take into account many of the factors that he has raised in his question to me. Let me just caution a little on the description of the difference between a static process and a moving procession. A public assembly is it's not a loophole. That the law deliberately treats the two things differently, because the policing challenges of a static protest are different in nature from the policing challenge of policing a march which is moving from one location to another. And the Public Order Act just recognises the difference between those two things. But the police do have the powers to condition the way that a static protest takes place. They've made use of those conditions very well, in my opinion, to date, and I'm sure they will continue to do so.
Paul Kohler.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Notwithstanding my liberal instincts, I too agree with the Home Secretary's decision to prohibit this march, given Iran's targeting of UK nationals abroad and our allies overseas. But that targeting also occurs here in the UK, as occurred in my constituency of Wimbledon with the stabbing of an Iranian dissident journalist 2 years ago. So can the Home Secretary tell the House what specific steps she's taking to protect Iranian dissidents here in the UK who might be targeted by the Iranian state?
Home Secretary.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm going to bank the fact that he said he agrees with my instincts on this one. Perhaps I'm not so authoritarian after all. Let me say to him, he raised a more serious point. On dissidents, and we know the threat posed by dissidents from the Iranian regime here on UK soil, and he's rightly noted an earlier case. Let me assure him we work very closely with counter-terror policing and with our security services on monitoring the threats posed to all individuals in the UK by foreign states, and we're always ready to take any appropriate action, and indeed the police and the security services take action every day.
Sir Gavin Williamson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and very much welcome the Home Secretary's decision. Iran has a track record of hostile activity in the United Kingdom. We have so many Iranians who've had to flee their home country for safety here in the United Kingdom, yet you still see the situation of charities effectively operating as proxies through the terrible regime in Tehran. And I just wonder what further action, the Home Secretary is going to take to clamp down on these organisations that masquerade as charities.
Home Secretary.
Well, on the specific point of charities, of course, the Charity Commission has powers to launch its own inquiries and then force compliance, and they, of course, have a full suite of powers to take action if they think someone has fallen outside of our rules. There is an ongoing Charity Commission investigation into the overall body relating to the IHRC, the trust, rather than the organisation that we are discussing here today. I'm sure the Charity Commission, once they've completed that work, will take appropriate action, and I know that will be the subject of further discussion in this House. Let me assure him we do recognise the desire by some to use our charities legislation and to find gaps in order to pursue other ends that are not charitable and not what the law was intended to do, and we won't hesitate to take further action in this area if we need to.
Madam Deputy Speaker, will the Home Secretary care to explain a contradiction that I see, that she has taken the ban to a peaceful march that has been happening for over four decades, 40 years, citing serious public disorder, whilst the government continues to permit the far right to protest outside hotels housing asylum seekers who call for serious public disorder outside those hotels. And if the Tommy Robinson march, Tommy Robinson, who's also the Home Secretary might like to know, a big fan of hers, the United Kingdom march in September 2025, where violence, in particular against Muslims, was cited, will that be banned as well?
Home Secretary.
Well, let me say to the honourable gentleman that each case has to be dealt with on its own facts. The Unite the Kingdom was a very large march. The police did not seek this power because they assessed, that based on their own risk assessment, that it was possible for that march to take place safely and that they could police it safely, as well as the counter-march that took place, which was smaller in nature. If they had made such a request, I would have obviously had to consider that request based on the full facts disclosed to me in the risk assessment. So he should not conflate multiple different different things. There is a very specific risk that is being posed by the march on this occasion, given the international context, and also given that there will actually be 5 marches. There is the main march by those behind the Al-Quds Day rally, and then there are the 4 counter-protesting marches as well. And he must recognise that there is a unique challenge that is posed by 5 marches taking place at the same time in this international context that is different to every other kind of protest and march that has taken place. And I would hope that he does not conflate the two, because I think that that could cause a loss of confidence across our communities. Marches take place every day on a whole range of issues, international and domestic in nature. The police almost never ask for those to be banned. In fact, I've never had such a request made of me, and I think the last time this power was used was something like 2010 or 2012. So it's been many, many years. It is a unique situation given the current context and the unique policing challenge of 5 different marches at the same time. And I would hope that he focuses a little more on the facts rather than the hyperbole that he began his question with initially.
Final question, Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I stand and we stand for an Iran free of the Ayatollah, free of the IRGC, free of a despotic regime that carries terrorism all over the world, free from a regime that killed 35,000 of their own citizens in January of this year. So, with that in mind, can I thank the Home Secretary very much for her decision to ban the Al-Quds march, and it's very important that we take a stand in this House to show that we're supporting those in Iran who are fighting for freedom. In light of repeated concerns for law enforcement and community organisations about the risk of public disorder and clashes with protesters, what further steps will the Home Secretary take to prevent groups promoting extreme ideologies from organising events that would incite intimidation or violence against minorities or other vulnerable groups in the United Kingdom? Thank you very much.
Home Secretary.
Well, look, what I would say to the honourable gentleman is we do have strong laws in this country already on inciting violence and other measures as well. And I would expect the police to always bring the full force of the law upon anybody found to be contravening our laws without fear or favour. And it is important that we do respect and rely on our legal framework, because we do have one of the strongest legal frameworks in the world on all of these matters. The government will always take further action if it's necessary, but I do believe our current framework allows us to strike the right balance between protecting individual freedoms. Even if they're offensive, even if they're provocative, they should still be protected, but as long as they do so within the confines of the law.
That is the end of the statement on protest policing. I'll give the front benches a moment or two to shuffle over.